Well, thank you all for coming back after break. You know, I think this is a pretty awesome venue. What do you guys think of the venue? Good? It reminds me a little bit of a nightclub. And, you know, I don't know how it is here in Poland, but in the US, they don't really let developers into nightclubs. So this might be as close as we get, so we should enjoy it, right? So my name is Jeff Bertoff, and I'm here today to talk to you about progressive web apps, what I think is the most exciting session of the day. Now, as we did in the keynote this morning, we are going to be doing some data collection while this session goes on. And the idea is that we want your feedback on what content you like, what is applicable, and the content that is not interesting to you. So if you have a minute, go ahead and grab either the QR code or the web URL on the screen. And notice it is a different URL than we used this morning. So if you have the one from this morning open, you're going to want to open this one instead. And then I think we're going to try to put it on the side monitors. So throughout the session, if you want to open it back up, and you don't have to keep it open the whole time, you can close it and open it back up. We'll have the link there so that you can get a shot in. All right. I want to start off and show you two apps. Now, you notice these are running on Android devices. These are the Twitter app. One of them, the one on the left-hand side, is a progressive web app. The one on the right-hand side is the Twitter native app. Now, what you're going to notice immediately is that they both have the same great UI design. They both are equally responsive. They're both equally as quick. They have the same features. The only difference between these two is that one is built with web technologies, and the other is written as a native app with Java. So we're going to talk about progressive web apps today and how we can use our web technologies to build applications that work like native apps across platform. So can I see a show of hands, if you don't mind? How many web developers do we have in the audience? Good, a number of them. Good. Now, how many C++ developers do we have? A couple. We love you guys because you actually build browsers, so that's pretty cool. Now, how many C# developers do we have? Okay, so you're going to want to pay attention because this is what C# and XAML will look like in about 5 years. Okay, so pay close attention as well. That's a joke. I'm making fun of you for being C# developers. All right, so the history of web and Windows goes back quite a ways. It actually started all the way back in Windows 7 when we allowed you to create apps on Windows 7 by having pinned sites. Pinned sites gave you the ability to create bookmarks that existed outside of the browser. So you could add a pin to your desktop and open up a website directly. Then in Windows 8, we added packaged apps where you could submit your web apps to the store as a packaged. And then in Windows 10, we introduced hosted web apps, which allowed you to maintain your web site on your server and use that as a store application. It was always live, it was always up to date because it always put to your web content. And today we're talking about progressive web apps. And progressive web apps are the next step in the evolution of our web app strategy. In fact, what we've done with hosted web apps is we've worked together with the W3C and with the other browser makers to come up with a single app model that works across platform and across browsers. Now, when we talk about progressive web apps on Windows, or we'll call them PWAs for short, keep in mind that these are the same apps that work across all the different platforms, but then on Windows, it's a UWP. So that means that it can work across all the different Windows devices. Your progressive web app can run on a tablet, a phone, or a PC, as well as an Xbox, a Surface Hub, or even a HoloLens as a flat app. Progressive web apps have certain characteristics. And many of these characteristics are the same ones that we would want to see in your web content as well, whether it's as an app or in the browser itself. So first of all, the name progressive web apps insist that your app itself is progressive. And when we talk about progressive or progressive enhancement, what we mean is that your app needs to work on every platform and take advantage of additional features when those features are available. So that way it won't break on a platform if it's in this case that it's missing a feature. It should be responsive, so it should fit on different screen sizes. It should be touch-friendly. It should be network independent, and we're going to talk about a new feature we have called Service Workers that helps us deliver that. It should be app-like. It should be always up to date. It should be safe. It should be HTTPS. And it has a number of other characteristics that we're going to be talking through today that makes a progressive web app like a native application from the web. So let's get right into how we build a progressive web app, because there's just a few steps that we need to take our already great web content into a progressive web app. And step one is to start with a great site. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that our web content is already fitting a lot of those criteria. Now, I'm going to show you a little demo of how this works today, and I'm going to use one of our internal sites that we use at Microsoft as an example. Now, this one is called Engineering Systems. It's a typical enterprise site that you may work on yourself or that you may utilize in your company. And Engineering Systems is the application that we use to manage builds of Windows. Do we have any Windows Insiders in here? Good. Well, thank you for being Windows Insiders. The builds that goes out to Windows Insiders, to different rings, and then finally out to the users is all managed through this. We can see different branches. So if we want to look for the different branches, we can even mark some of them so that we add them to our watch list. And sometimes they'll be added to the watch list. And we see the data here that we get for the different branches, and then inside of the branches, we can see which builds are inside of there. Now, this is a responsive site, so it's going to work on different screen sizes. It has a nice touch-friendly layout. It has all the characteristics that we would want to have inside of a progressive web app. And that's where you need to start. So if you have a site that's missing some of those characteristics, the first thing you want to do is make sure that it meets those criteria. The second step is to build an app manifest. Now, in the past, we've had different app manifests for different platforms, which meant for Windows, you had to build one app manifest. For Chrome or Chrome OS, you had to build a different one. If you're building for Cordova, you'd have to build even a different app manifest. Well, we've worked with the W3C to come up with a standard manifest for progressive web apps. And the great thing about it is it's a JSON object. So as JavaScript developers, we're very familiar with JSON objects and how they work. This is simply a collection of metadata about our application. So things like the name, the start URL, what language our application is all collected and put into this JSON object. Now, hand coding JSON can be a little tricky. We have a tool that I want to show you today that's going to help with some of these steps for building progressive web apps. And it's actually called PWA Builder. The first thing I want to do is copy the URL from my site so that I can use it in this example. And what PWA Builder will do is it will take your website and it will use it, and it will look through your site. It'll scrape some of the content. It'll find out maybe what your theme color should be based on the primary color of your site, finds out what language it's in, the start page, and it builds that JSON object for you, for your manifest. Now, another thing that can be time intensive is to have all the different images built for all the different platforms. So we have a tool that also will generate all the different images that you would need to build your progressive web app across platform. And you'll see I have different sizes. This is going to account for the different size tiles in Windows, the different icons and icon densities that you get on things like iOS and Android as well. So we need to add this to our website. Normally, you'd be able to just download this, and you can download this here, but I've already have it downloaded to save a little bit of time, and I have my app running locally. So I'm going to open this up in my bash script. So here's my bash terminal here, and we will be using Visual Studio Code today. So this is my website. I've downloaded the images ahead of time. So I have my manifest. I'm going to drag that into my project. And then I have my images. And I'm going to drag those into my project as well. And then I'm going to go to my index page, and I'm going to add a link tag for my manifest file. And the href is going to be the name and location. Not a good time to update. Of my file, and then the rel for it will be manifest. And that's it. And now my manifest is added to my site. Once you add your manifest to your site, you're going to start seeing immediate value from it before it even becomes a progressive web app, okay? So, for example, we work with the Bing team who goes out and indexes the entire web. When they find the manifest, they're able to add that to their search results so that they can pick up the icons that you have there, the description that you have for that, and return it right in the search results. So this is a partner called Tradio. The first response that you get from Bing is their website. The second one is a link to the Windows version of their progressive web app. So a user would be able to install your application directly from the Bing search results and be able to have a little bit of a better presence in SEO. Now, Bing is not the only one who utilizes data from the manifest. The Chrome browser does as well. Google search results on Android also use it to present the progressive web apps that are out there. So you immediately get value from doing this. Now, the next step is to make your application work offline. We have a new feature that we're going to be talking about today called Service Worker. Now, a service worker is something that's coming later this year in Windows builds. If you are one of those Windows insiders, you're going to start seeing service workers in the next release of Windows Insiders, the next release or two. Service workers basically acts as a proxy. It's a JavaScript file that can sit in between your website and your web server. And then it can start to control your traffic. So for example, I have a new cache that comes with a service worker. When I make a request to my server and it comes back, I can put a copy of that response into my cache. So the next time the website asks for that particular file, instead of going all the way back to the server, I can pull it out of the cache instead and return it immediately. So what it gives us is it gives us the ability to create a more responsive and a faster website. I have a quick video here of this applied to our engineering system site. You're going to notice two things. One, the one on the right that is after service worker, you'll notice it's moving a lot quicker. It's a lot more responsive because we're able to cache those files ahead of time. But you also look at the bottom, you can see the amount of data that we're saving by not having to go back to the server for all those files. So a lot of us are independent web developers who pay their own bill on services like Azure. So it's actually nice to be able to save money in data transfer as well. So what you've seen here is that when we add the service worker to our engineering site, we're able to load through or run through that flow in almost half the time than we did when we didn't have the service worker. So let's see how we add that here. Now I'm going to go back to the PWA builder. The next step in our process on PWA Builder is creating a service worker. And what we have here is we have a number of predefined functionality for you on service workers. So if there's a particular functionality that you're looking for on your site, you can choose it from the list. What I'm going to do is actually go to a cache first network, all right? So that means it pulls it from the cache before it goes and gets it on the network. And then I'm going to copy the file here. And then I'm going to go back to my project, and I'm going to paste it in. Now, I have the service worker file already created here. And you'll notice I already have an array and a cache ID. So when I pull that in here, I'm going to go ahead and remove the array and cache ID that I had there. Now, the reason why I added that ahead of time is because I have a bunch of files that I wanted to cache, so I created that array ahead of time. Now, the service worker itself runs a few steps. The first one is to install, and that happens one time with your service worker. So the first time the user hits your site, it runs through the install process. And then after it's installed, it actually listens to this event, which is called fetch. So the fetch event fires any time that a network request is made. It doesn't matter if it's making a request for a HTML file, a JavaScript file, or an image. It's going to pull them all in, and what I'm doing with my fetch is I'm making a decision here. I'm responding with that request from the cache. So instead of going to the server, I pull it from the cache. And if it's not in the cache, I catch the response there, and I go and pull it from the server and return it from the server. That way, I'm going and collecting files from the server, putting it in my cache, serving it from the cache first, and then when I don't have it, I go back to the server and get it and stick it in the cache. What this allows me to do as a side effect is it actually allows my application to run offline. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then the last step that we're going to do is we're going to go back to our index page, and we're going to add the register. Now, this is how you add a service worker to a page. You don't use a script tag for it. Instead, you go through a small process here where we're checking to see if we support service workers, and if we do, then we register the service worker, which points to our service worker file. Now, if you remember my site when it was live on the server here, I have this flow of data that is updating constantly with what features are in what builds. I'm going to show you what that looks like locally. So here, I'm going to just start a local node server. And then I'm going to go back to my browser and watch what happens the first time that I load it. It should look just like what's on the site. Oh, there we go. See, we already have the data being pulled in from this particular URL. If I go back to the PWA builder, you can see I have my activity JSON pulling that data in. So instead of bringing it in one by one, like I get from the server, there we go. It's actually going to pull in the last 4 items from that and then add it. That way my feed is already full when I load the page. See, it can pull it from the cache just like it does from the server. I want to go back to my file, and then I want to uncomment the rest of these so that it will cache my site and make it nice and fast, just like we had in the video. And then I'm going to go back to my bash shell here. And one of the cool things about bash, if you don't use it on Windows and you're a web developer, you might want to try it. You can actually run Windows apps inside of your bash shell, and you can run bash shells scripts on top of Windows. So I wrote a script ahead of time that does all of my GitHub pushing for me. So it runs through the different commands, and then it's going to push it up to my Azure website and wait for the publishing to happen there. So while we're doing that, we're going to move on to the last step. Or not the last step, the next step, which is publishing it. Now, we've already published it for the web, but we're going to talk about publishing it for the different stores as well. And we're going to use Windows as an example today because we're building for Windows. This is the store listing that your progressive web app gets. It looks just like any other application in the store. The data that it gets, the descriptions, the screenshots, the title, all comes from your manifest. So the more information you have in the manifest, the better looking your store page will be. So it's already updated. Now, when I go back to PWA Builder, the last step here is for publish. Now, we've just published to the web. We've added that stuff to our website. And now we want to create the listing for Windows. There is a publish one step here where it collects a little bit of information from me and then takes the info you get from PWA Builder and it adds it into the store listing so that you don't have to do anything to get your PWA listed there. Now, what happens after we create that listing is we'll go ahead and send you an email with a link so that you can see your progressive web app in the store, and then even give you an opportunity to just take ownership of it, make changes, start to get some of the data that you get from the Dev Center and all of that great stuff. Now, if you download it, you will get a debug copy of your app as well. So let me show you what that would look like. I've downloaded it ahead of time, but you get the source here, and you get a script that lets you sideload your application. And it takes just a second, and then you'll see my ES Tracker app here. I can pin it to the start, just like I do any other application. When I launch it, you'll see that it looks like an app. It doesn't have the browser Chrome around it. It can be resized. When I have that same functionality here, I can add things to my watch list, which get added to my landing page here. It looks like an application. To a user, a progressive web app shouldn't look any different than any other application. To them, it's just an app. Now, the last step is we want you to do something new with your app. Progressive web apps have more rights and privileges than applications when they run on the web. So the difference between a progressive web app and a website is the progressive web app comes in that standalone container, like I just showed you. It doesn't run on top of the browser process, which means it has a smaller memory footprint. It gives you background tasks more often. It has an isolated cache. You also get nearly unlimited storage. And I say nearly because, of course, your device has a storage limit. But on the web, we cap the amount of data that any domain can store. When it's a progressive web app, we remove those caps so that if you want to store a 2-hour HD video through a progressive web app, you can do that. We also give you access to the Windows API sets. So if you want to do things like check the calendar of the user or implement Cortana features or look at their address book, you can do that. And I'm going to show you a demo of how that works. Going back to my application here, I'm going to dig into one of my one of my branches, and then inside of the branch, we're going to have a few builds. Let me restart my app. Okay. Now, inside of any branch, I'm going to have a number of different builds that are going to have different release scores. Okay, the release scores tell me how ready this particular build is. When we release a build at Microsoft, we like to make a big experience out of it. And I imagine if you had a build server of your own, you would want some sort of physical mechanism to release those builds. So it should probably be a button. It should probably be a big red button that you use to release builds. All right, so what's going to happen is I'm going to push this button, and then it's going to release a new insider build. Now, this big red button is tied to my progressive web app. So I'm going to go ahead and press it here, and the first thing that I can do is I can use it to review builds. So if I'm in my office and I'm looking at the wall with 10 different monitors on it, I can just sit back with my button and go through the different builds and look for one that has a score that I want to release. Let's see here, I have a 98 and I have a 94. Let's go with the 98, all right? And then I go ahead and hit Launch Build, which is going to bring up my release window. I can choose which of the branches I want it to go to. I'm going to stick with the default. You also see that it recognizes that I have the big red button here. And now I'm going to go ahead and put this into release mode. Now, for this, let's make a little bit of a dramatic release here. So I'm going to need your help. I want you to count down with me. Okay, we're going to do a 3, 2, 1, and then I'll, slap the button really hard. Okay, are you ready? Let's do it. 3, 2, 1. And what happens? We have our little buddy who comes out and lets us know the status of our build. Only with big red buttons do you get that kind of excitement. Now I'm gonna let you in a little secret. Big red button is not an official Windows API. But if I look inside of my big red button, you'll see that it's actually a Surface Dial that I'm using. And Surface Dial does have APIs that are available from my progressive web app. So I'm gonna go back to my code base one more time, and I wanna show you inside of my index.js file, all good developers have just one big JavaScript file that they put all their code in, right? Don't tell me I'm wrong here. And of course, when I start index.html, I have to call this index.js, right? So I'm gonna look inside of here for Windows, and what I'm gonna find is here I'm doing some feature detection. I'm looking for the type of Windows that isn't undefined. So that's why I'm checking to see if an object called window.windows is inside of my DOM. And if it is, I know that I'm inside of a progressive web app on Windows 10, and I can use these APIs. So what they look like is there's actually a window UI input called radio control configure. So I'm launching that. I am adding my images here for the different radio control. And then this is the part I think is really cool. Then I simply add an event listener to it. So you're used to add event listeners because we use them in the web all the time. And it's the same thing here. We're using an add event listener just like we would for touch or a key input to know when the dial is being turned or the button is being pushed on the dial. And that way I'm able to use this right inside of my progressive web app, right inside of the rest of the application code. So it's pretty exciting what we can do with progressive web apps on Windows and cross-platform. Remember, these are apps that are gonna run across platform. And it's gonna run on Android natively. We have polyfills to even get you into iOS and macOS, even back to Windows 7 today. A few next steps that I'd love to see you do. First, if you're not a Windows Insider and you're a web developer, join the Windows Insider program because we actually are releasing service workers very soon there, and you'll get a chance to play with it ahead of time, ahead of everyone else. Go to pwabuilder.com to convert your web content into a progressive web app. You can actually do that today, and then your service workers will start kicking in on Windows as soon as it's available to the users. And then take your web app and try something new. With all the APIs that you have available to, all the storage that you have, and the background tasks that you can run, you can create experiences that just aren't available on the web today. So thank you so much for your time today. Next up, we have Dave. You've been a great audience. Thank you. Dave?